The headlines, the American Center for Law and Justice has been quietly working to find out what was going on behind the scenes in the United States after that secret meeting between then Attorney General Loretta Lynch and former President Bill Clinton last year during the presidential election. Jay Sekulow was with us to tell us what they've learned. Jay, good to see you. You've been at the forefront of a whole lot of these things, and yeah. I understand I can't talk about some of them with you, but I do want to talk about the thing for the American Center for Law and Justice. You brought a FOIA request to learn more details about the meeting with Attorney General Lynch and the president. What did you find out?
So here's what we did. We initially, in FOIA matters, you send a letter in requesting information. We wanted to know what took place on that tarmac between the former president of the United States, Bill Clinton, and the then Attorney General of the United States, Loretta Lynch, because the time frame of this was just days before the former Secretary of State, Bill Clinton's wife, Hillary Clinton, was going to be questioned about the whole email situation, that whole scandal that was erupting. And then you had this unusual meeting. So when the meeting was reported, we sent a FOIA request into both the Department of Justice and the FBI. The FBI responded back pretty quickly saying, we have no documents responsive to your request. The Department of Justice did not respond at all. So what we did was we filed a federal lawsuit in October of last year demanding the documents, demanding any documents relevant to what took place on the tarmac. So here's what we get. The first thing we get is this. We win the case in court and get an order that requires production. We got about 420 pages of documentation. We've been going through that, looking at timelines, looking at who was on it. First thing we saw was, number one, the FBI lied to us because, in fact, there was email exchanges between the Department of Justice and the FBI and the Department of Justice. So saying there were no documents responsive to our request from the FBI was a false statement. There obviously was, because the Department of Justice ended up handing those over. That was number one. Number two, we learned in the timeline of events, and this took place very quickly, by the time this question started coming in from the media, this was immediately brought to the Deputy Attorney General's office and very quickly to the Attorney General herself, who we find out is using an alias. There you go. Now, it also goes to a Deputy Attorney General whose job description in the law firm he's now with includes this statement, that he handled crisis management for the Department of Justice. Obviously, if you look at the scale of emails here, there was serious crisis management going on. They were trying to figure out how they were going to spin, how they were going to control the information coming out on this. Then, as we continue to delve deeper into this situation, we see that there's an email exchange between not just the Department of Justice and the FBI, but the Department of Justice and the White House, actually to the Assistant Press Secretary. And that's despite the fact that Jay Carney and the others said, hey, we don't know anything about that. Run that to the Department of Justice. We've not been given notice of any of this. That's something they should handle. Well, that ended up being incorrect as well. Then to complicate it more, Pat, if you could complicate it more, you need a whiteboard to figure this out. There's an ongoing Senate investigation right now by the Senate Judiciary Committee by Chuck Grassley and Dianne Feinstein on this whole matter of what took place during the Hillary Clinton email scandal, the fact that the Attorney General would not call it a criminal investigation, would call it a matter. James Comey made the statement very clearly that the reason he went forward with that unusual statement he did was because of that tarmac meeting. Well, lo and behold, one of the lawyers on the chain of emails who was in the Office of Attorney General, one of the senior counselors to the Attorney General, is now the deputy counsel to Dianne Feinstein. So she could possibly be a witness in this matter. So you see the tangled web this was, and all this showed was, and then you had the whole media side of this where the media was reluctant to engage on this. You've got a statement coming in from the Washington Post who says that we've corrected the story to include what you've asked. They also made the statement, the Washington Post said, just answer a couple more questions. I think I could kind of basically clamp this down. So you had this kind of media collusion going on. And one of them saying, well, even if Fox News covers it, we're not necessarily going to cover it, or it's not going to be picked up by other stations. So all of this was going on. What does it show you? That took place, what took place at that airport in Phoenix was not the right thing to do by the Attorney General of the United States. She never recused herself, and that whole matter needs to be investigated.
Well, if you find out the bottom of it, what's going to happen? Was Comey involved? He mentioned that he had enough evidence to bring an indictment, but he chose not to do so. I mean, there's terrible collusion. It looks like some laws were being broken. Are people going to be?
Well, I'm always quick to point out that there's not a crime of collusion. I mean, you have to have an underlying crime that you can then be in conspiracy with. James Comey, by the way, what he said, he didn't say it enough to indict. He said he listed all the evidence and said no reasonable prosecutor would bring an prosecution against Hillary Clinton because she was extremely careless, which, by the way, is the definition of gross negligence under the criminal statute. That's just an aside. Yeah. So that's what he utilized. But he did say, Pat, that the basis upon which he'd made that unusual public statement, which was unheard of within the Department of Justice, and it created a lot of angst within the Department of Justice and for lawyers generally that were monitoring this, he said he did this because of that tarmac meeting. So what has to happen now is the Senate Judiciary Committee is reviewing portions of this. They now need to do a thorough review, and I frankly think that inside the Department of Justice, they need to have investigators on this because what took place there was so inappropriate. Remember this, Secretary Clinton was never put under oath. There's a discussion with her husband 4 days before she's to testify, and then 3 days later or 4 days later, they announce no charges to be brought. So you just look at the facts, and now we've got them all with all these requests that we've received. The one thing we didn't get, by the way, was they redacted the talking points. They were developing talking points for the Attorney General. We're going back to court to get those.
A conspiracy of some kind. What do we do about that? I mean, are they just going to get away with it, skate free? I mean, all the attention is now they've got Mueller, and I know you're not supposed to talk about Mueller and what he's doing with Trump, but the attack has been on Trump, and the dark state has been trying to undermine Trump and get him indicted or get him somehow thrown out of office. Shouldn't it be time that there's an attack on Hillary Clinton to show the evil that was in that situation?
I think what has to happen is everybody's been talking about grand juries lately. They should get a grand jury to investigate this entire matter, from the emails to the tarmac meeting to everything in between, to the bleach bit. All of that needs to be reviewed, and it needs to be reviewed by FBI agents in conjunction with a grand jury so they can issue subpoenas, which is the normal course of what happens here. None of that happened in this previous matter, as Loretta Lynch called it, and James Comey willingly acquiesced to calling it a matter. So I think now you need to have a full investigation. As I said, Senate Judiciary Committee says they're going to look at it. They're already looking at it. The issue there is, as I said, the deputy counsel to Dianne Feinstein is a witness. She was on these email exchanges, Ms. Herwig. So she was on these email exchanges, so she'd have to be recused from the case. But it needs to be fully investigated.
Can you get Sessions, the Attorney General, to follow through on what you're talking about? I mean, the American Center for you're not able to do it. You can't convene a grand jury, but
no, I don't get to convene grand juries, no.
That's
so
right.
What happens here is we're going to bring all of the information we have to these various Senate committees. And the Department of Justice knows what they have because they sent it to us. So it's going to be up to them to decide if they're going to move forward on this in a criminal case. But we're going to send this to the Senate Judiciary Committee and to the House Judiciary Committee. So they have all this information. We're developing a memo that just puts the timeline together of what took place. There's an aspect of law that's called res ipsa loquitur. The thing speaks for itself. When you look at the context of all these emails together, it speaks for itself what was going on here. This was a massive crisis management situation where they did not want to obviously give us what the final determination of how they were going to handle it was going to be. But what it points to is the interplay between justice, FBI and justice, and then justice and the White House. And again, all of that needs to be investigated.
See, these guys are being portrayed as the fellows with the white hats. They're the heroes, and Trump and his team are being portrayed as the guys with the black hats. They're the evil ones. It looks like we ought to switch the narrative. Can you do that?
Well, it's not a question of just switching the narratives. The facts here do speak for themselves. And so it's the left is playing with narratives on this stuff. I'm going to just give you facts. And these are the facts. I mean, I'm holding in my hand the evidence. I mean, we took a federal court case to get it. So what happens now is the investigations need to go forward now that we have the evidence. We're going to ask for more. We're going back into court, actually, to ask for additional documentation that we think we're entitled to. But we've already got enough here for an investigation to start, no question about it.